Good morning and welcome to Fairlawn Avenue United Church on this Truth and Reconciliation Sunday in September. It's good to gather, and I'm glad you're here. In past years, we referred to this Sunday as Orange Shirt Day to mark the dark and troubling legacy of the Indian residential schools in Canada lasting well over a century. Following the horrific, but to many people not surprising, discovery of unmarked graves of hundreds of children and others on the grounds of former residential schools this past summer, September 30th was declared a statutory holiday by the federal, though not the Ontario, government, to be known as a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, to honor the survivors, their families, and communities.
Welcome everyone to our special service honoring the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples that is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I acknowledge that I am a guest here, and I'm grateful to live and work on this land. It's important to acknowledge the land we're on when gathering, in person or virtually, but it's also important to acknowledge and feel gratitude each and every day. Toronto is built upon some of the original portage trails used by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Wherever you go in this country, take time to learn about the rich history of the land before and after colonization. This year especially has brought to light many atrocities of the past and dark times in our country. The mistreatment of Indigenous peoples across Canada is something that we all must take responsibility for. The discovery of thousands of unmarked graves at former residential schools has been a stark reminder of the pain caused by the government, by churches including the United Church, and by non-Indigenous Canadians to Indigenous families for over 7 generations. Today, in addition to the intergenerational trauma inflicted by residential schools, Indigenous peoples continue to suffer lack of opportunity on reserves, mistreatment by police, and environmental racism through boil water advisories that still exist in 33 communities across Canada. Acknowledging the land is simply the beginning, and we all have a responsibility to take action. Learn about the land we live on, and the traditional practices of the Indigenous peoples who lived here before us and continue to live here today. Read the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Learn what has been done and what has yet to be addressed, and write to your local politicians to ask the federal government to fulfill the commitments made in the Commission report. As is written in What We Have Learned, Principles of Truth and Reconciliation, by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, by establishing a new and respectful relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians, we will restore what must be restored, repair what must be repaired, and return what must be returned. The National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is one day. I challenge and urge everyone to learn and take action towards reconciliation each and every day of the year.
Join me in a prayer of awareness, of opening, as we center ourselves in worship this day. Through the changing patterns of autumn light and shadow, through the ins and outs, the ups and downs of these days, we gather. We seek here in this time things that restore and renew and reorient us. In the midst of the noise and clamor of a world on edge, we seek stillness. In the midst of confusion and commitments, we seek simplicity. In the midst of criticism and the burden of our own fears, we seek acceptance. Faced with moments of despair and disillusionment, we seek hope. Holy One, who creates beauty, who heals wounds, who rejoices in the swirl of dancing star clouds. Guide us to centered places of belonging and becoming, that we may know how loved we are, that we may walk together in wholeness. Amen. Our reader today is Derek Wishart.
Good morning. In Mark, Jesus' familiar words about welcoming children come immediately after his teaching on marriage and divorce. This may seem jarring, except that Jesus approaches both topics through a concern for those who are vulnerable. In last week's reading from Mark, Jesus asserted that whoever wants to be first must be last. As an example, he took a child in his arms and said, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." And now, a few verses later, when parents bring their children to Jesus, we would assume that the response would be to welcome them. When the disciples scold them instead, Jesus and we are indignant. But we need to be careful given the ways this text has been understood in the past. What Jesus says is that experiencing the reign of God is like welcoming a child, not becoming like a child. As a result, welcome God's kingdom like a child has led to sentimental reflections on the value of a simple, childlike faith. But perhaps the meaning is better expressed by welcome the kingdom like you would welcome a child. Which begs an important question. How, in fact, do we welcome or treat children in this world? In the culture of Jesus' time, where honor and shame were crucial, people would eagerly welcome someone of high status who could, by association, increase one's own standing. Children were of no status. Embracing God's reign is not a way of becoming first or great, but a way to identify with the least and to serve simply as Jesus did. Our reading is Mark chapter 10, verses 13 to 16. People were bringing children to Jesus so that he would bless them. But the disciples scolded them. When Jesus saw this, he grew angry and said to them, "Allow the children to come to me. Don't forbid them, because God's kingdom belongs to people like these children. I assure you that whoever doesn't welcome God's kingdom like you would welcome a child will never enter it." Then he hugged the children and blessed them. In this reading, we hear God's voice. God is still speaking. Thanks be to God.
Jeremy Dutcher is a classically trained operatic tenor and composer who blends his Woolastock First Nations roots in New Brunswick into the music he creates, transcending boundaries by revering the traditional songs of his people and land and weaving them into contemporary expressions. This is Honor Song. At one time, carved in wood or stone around the top of baptismal fonts in many churches, one would commonly find the words, "Suffer the little children to come unto me," from the King James Version of our reading today. It was a source of confusion and some distress to me as a child each Sunday, following a perfunctory children's time with the minister, to walk past this inscription. Asking my parents about it did little to clarify the meaning of what seemed to me to be perfectly clear, that for children, Jesus represented coercion and suffering in some way or other. Of course, 410 years ago in 1611, when that version of the English Bible appeared, the word suffer meant allow or permit, or in this case, do not prevent. But tell that to a 7-year-old or to an Indigenous child forced to attend a residential school in Canada. Aside from outdated translations, what went along with the reading of these words was an assumption that what Jesus was saying is that we should welcome the news of the coming of the kingdom of God like a child, suggesting a sentimental picture of childlike faith that was simple and innocent. It was an image of faith that was, to be honest, more childish than childlike. More recently, another reading of Jesus' words has emerged that Jesus says we should welcome God's reign, God's fulfillment of creation's goodness, the way we would welcome a child coming among us. The assumption behind this reading is that we would welcome a child with openness and attention into a safe and inviting place. Except that doesn't work all that well either. Many children in our world today are in a far better place than at the time of Jesus, but life remains precarious for a shocking number of children still. The United States has, for example, refused to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Child slavery continues in many parts of the world, as well as child marriage. And child soldiers are found in most of today's conflict zones. Child refugees are preyed upon by traffickers, and child poverty is a continuing reality worldwide. Here in Canada, in 1989, the United Church and others successfully lobbied for an all-party initiative, Campaign 2000, that passed unanimously in the House of Commons, promising to end child poverty by the year 2000. After the resolution passed, rates of child poverty continued to rise before decreasing somewhat. Today, 32 years later, there are approximately 1.35 million children living in poverty in Canada. And income inequality between the rich and the poor has grown to new heights. Suffer the little children. Of course, then we come up against the history, the stories, the images of Canada's treatment of the more than 150,000 Indigenous children who were torn from their homes and sent to residential schools between 1863 and 1996, where they were forced to assimilate to European cultural and religious norms, values, language, and knowledge. For years, Indigenous communities have told the stories of the children who just disappeared, who never returned home from their residential schools. Many Indigenous parents were never told what happened to their children, nor were they given the opportunity, if the children had died, to receive their bodies for a community ceremony or burial. Whether their deaths were due to illness, abuse, neglect, or murder, the lack of dignity offered to these children is heartrending and inexcusable. This summer, the horror of what happened was brought to life again. Ground-penetrating radar began documenting the existence of many more unmarked graves. Over 1,800 have been identified since May. The identities of the children and others are unknown, and we do not know the causes of death. This has added renewed pain to Indigenous families and communities who are already reeling with the cross-generational trauma caused by the residential school system in Canada. Compassion and justice for the vulnerable is at the heart of Jesus' way that shapes the good news of our faith. One day, some parents brought children to have Jesus bless them, but those in Jesus' circle turned them away and rebuked them for bothering Jesus. When he figured out what was going on, Jesus was angry. He was angry. In the words he says, I don't think he is saying that we should become childlike in our faith, nor does he naively imagine that the world routinely welcomes children and that we would do well to welcome God's reign in the same way. No, Jesus is angry. What comes out of him, therefore, is prophetic speech. This is a calling to account that in God's future, children, the nobodies of the world, with no status, no power, no economic value, are fully a part of God's vision for life, for justice and peace too. The discovery of graves is a stark reminder of a horrific chapter in Canadian history. But what do Jesus' words mean now, today? When Indigenous children in Canada, who represent 7% of all children under 14, make up over 52% of children in foster care, today, in 2021. What does it mean to live into Jesus' words of prophetic justice when that is our reality now? In 2018, the General Council of the United Church of Canada adopted the Calls to the Church document, which lays out the Indigenous Church's vision for Indigenous peoples' mission and ministry within the United Church. It outlines pathways for the whole church to continue to walk in the Spirit of Christ toward justice, healing, and reconciliation. I commend it to you. It reads in part, our roots as Indigenous peoples are what the Creator has made us to be. We are embracing who we are as Creator made us. The Indigenous Church will be an instrument of healing our identity and a place of renewal of our cultures. Our roots have been broken by colonialism, and we will restore them. Wounds came from being told we are wrong and the loss of language and culture. The colonial system has been dehumanizing for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. We will teach you who we are. what our values are, and place into practice how we want to work among ourselves and with others. We have faith that the Spirit and the love of God will move us forward on the road of true reconciliation. In those words, there is incredible grace and hope and a path to healing. They evoke Jesus' prophetic words that God's kingdom belongs to the children, to the vulnerable, to the least and the last. In those words, there is an invitation to us all to walk in the way of an earlier prophet named Micah, who said, God has shown you what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God and with the children. Amen. In 2018, as the United Church of Canada formally committed to the calls to the church, the United Church produced a video about our journey as a church. It's called A Different Future.
There was 150,000 of us, of our people, passed through the doors of that residential school. The teachers were mean and beat you if you didn't follow the rules. Many didn't make it home after residential school. And the ones that survived were changed forever. We were about 5 years old. We were picking up the children to go to residential school, loading them up on a bus, bringing them to school. It will be a long and hard road to regain the trust that was lost. But we're hoping to have that reconciliation to make our community strong. Trust is lost. Even our own people distrust each other. But we got to build that trust and that relationship, and they got to help us. We're not begging for it, but they should honor it and wrap our people up with strong love and compassion.
It's the courageous who are willing to step forward at a time of great risk and change to say we must do something differently. Because if we want a different future, you can't repeat the past.
Reconciliation is a big, big word, but nobody's doing anything. We haven't changed the dialogue in over 100 years. We're still in the same place, and we're still listening to our elders share their stories of grief and trauma within the residential school, but we're not hearing.
This conversation is still going on in the country. There's a lot of, reconciliation is a very contested idea. And so there are still many who equate reconciliation with if I could put it this way, peace at all costs, with just sort of Indigenous people should reconcile to, rather than us working to reconcile with.
From the time that the first apology was made in 1986, people have been saying, all right, well, we hear the apology, but in terms of accepting it, we need to see it acted out. And part of apology in the theological tradition is atonement. This is really what we're talking about. It's atoning for the sins of the past.
And I think that the idea of resistance is recognizing that the reconciliation journey is not about finding the new recolonizing ways to we'll have an apology and we'll do this, TRC, and we'll have all these things, and then it'll all be good, and we can feel good about that. It's not, reconciliation to me has never been about that. To me, it is about the idea that it is a decolonizing struggle.
Reconciliation is a hard word to swallow, but it's facing towards it. Saying sorry is not quite enough, but they have to recognize the wrong. To recognize the wrong to make it right. Recognize taking away is to provide elders to come to the schools to help the language, the culture, the song and dance, and provide it for equivalent of the years they take it away from us. And that's the start of reconciliation.
Certainly one of the biggest messages we've been hearing at the caucus group so far is about the importance of Indigenous spirituality and about the church welcoming Indigenous expressions of their relationship with God, the kind of ceremonies that are meaningful to them, use of the language, and trying to bring that together.
The church has a real social responsibility to bring us back to that, to restore that, because it makes us whole. My children can't be strong the way they are if they didn't have Indigenous spirituality, and that was taken from us, and we were lost without it. We were broken people without it. That's what Lodge to me is a good place to go and recenter myself, to reground myself. It's the only place that I know where I can sit inside the womb of Mother Earth and give all of those worldly things to the Lord. I can't be who I am without it. I need it.
The day the government will build us a longhouse, a place where we can reside and bring back the teachings of our ancestors, grandparents, learn how to be parents, learn our culture, learn our song and our dance. And that's one of the steps that they can do to take care of the spirit. Take care of the spirit of the people that are still coming.
I remember Dr. Jesse Soto's vision of seeing stars in the sky and saying, those are the Indigenous students being trained for ministry in our way, to work in our communities. So in a sense, that was the call behind the establishment of Dr. Jesse Soto Resource Center. And then Francis Sandy had the same idea that all of the Indigenous communities of faith should have an Indigenous minister.
Really understanding what it means to live into the calls to the church that are going to be coming from the caretakers of our Indigenous circle. That document and the whole relationship that it envisions and calls us to, practicing that, living into that, being willing to be challenged by it, and and having our structures, our ways of doing things changed because we are intentional about living out those calls. That's our next step, because that's sort of a roadmap for us into being the church we want to be. What a gift that is to our church, is that this group of Indigenous leaders and then the whole Indigenous church have worked so hard and so diligently to create a way forward for us where we can be together.
We saw that there's lots of history that was behind it. So the beginning of before the call is made, the history is cited. So remembering the first Indigenous presbytery, Keewatin, remembering the foundation of All Native Circle Conference, remembering the apology, various things like that. And then the idea of perhaps affirming this special nature of Indigenous ministry training at Dr. Jesse or Francis Sandy. That's the history, the foundation for why we're asking for something. And then the call comes. And it comes again from the UN Declaration.
The Indigenous folks in the United Church, after all our long history, have said we want to be church together, and then have done the hard work of saying, and here's how we can do that. Here's what this can look like, and invited us as a whole church to be on that journey together. I'm so humbled by that, and I'm so grateful.
Kairos moments come, and they come when they come. They're not manufactured, they just arrive. And this is a Kairos moment for Canada.
Last year, when we were in Pinawa, when the caretakers made their report to the National Aboriginal Spiritual Gathering, I was filled with emotion. I was touched by the work they had done and the wisdom they offered, and I was touched by the trust that they expressed. Trust that we are a church that yearns for this kind of transformation.
It's a moment of opportunity that God provides for us to begin to do things in a different way, to begin to build new relationships now, presently, and build a stronger future for everyone in Canada.
This is a Kairos moment. It's a Kairos moment because we have this window that's opened up in our society and in our church and on ourselves. This moment offers us an opportunity to learn, particularly as settler people, how to listen deeply, and to, in that listening, to be transformed by what we hear, by what we learn. I keep saying to people when I'm talking these days, because it's this sort of aha moment that I had recently, and it seems so obvious that it's almost embarrassing to say, but I keep being reminded and reminding folks that if we want to be different, we can't be the same.
Sometimes it helps to hear stories through different voices, through the experiences of others, such as children. The Winnipeg Indigenous author and public speaker David A. Robertson, a member of the Norway House Cree Nation, wrote the children's book When We Were Alone, about a young girl helping her grandmother in the garden. She begins to notice things. Why does her grandmother have long braided hair and wear beautifully colored clothing? Why does she speak another language? As she asks her grandmother, she's told about life in a residential school a long time ago, where everything was taken away. When We Were Alone is read for us by Montreal primary school teacher Samantha Paige Smith.
Good morning, students. So today we are reading When We Were Alone, written by David A. Robertson and illustrated by Julie Flett. Today I helped my kokom in her flower garden. She always wears colorful clothes. It's like she dresses in rainbows. When she bent down to prune some of the flowers, I couldn't even see her because she blended in with them. She was like a chameleon. Nokom, why do you wear so many colors? I asked. Nokom said, well, nosism. When I was your age, at home in my community, my friends and I wore many different colors. But at the school I went to, far, far away from home, they gave us different clothes to wear. All the children dressed the same, and our clothes weren't colorful at all. We all mixed together like storm clouds. Why did you have to dress like that? I asked. They didn't like we wore such beautiful colors, Nokom said. They wanted us to look like everybody else. But sometimes in the fall, when we were alone, and the leaves had turned to their warm autumn hues, we would roll around on the ground. We would pile the leaves all over the clothes they gave us, and we would be colorful again. This made us happy. Now, Nokom said, I always wear the most beautiful colors. After I helped with the flowers, we went to the back gate. There were vines covering the gate, and they reached all the way to the ground. When my kokom turned to fix the latch, I saw her braid hung almost as low as the vines. It was like she had a tail. Nokom, why do you wear your hair so long? I asked. Nokom said, well, nosisim. When I was your age, at home in my community, my friends and I grew our hair long, just like our people had always done. It made us feel strong and proud. But at the school I went to, far away from home, they cut all of our hair. Our strands of hair mixed together on the ground like blades of dead grass. Why did you have to wear your hair like that? I asked. They didn't like we were proud, Nokom said. They wanted us to be like everybody else. But sometimes in the spring, when we were alone and the grass had grown so long and thick in the field, we would pick the blades from the ground. We would braid them into the short hair they'd given us, and we would have long hair again. This made us happy. Now, Nokom said, I always wear my hair very long. After my kokom had fixed the latch, I followed her to the birdhouse. There was a bird flying through the air like a jingle dress dancer. She fed the bird and whispered, Na pinaisis, misiso, ta misi kitilian, ta maskasien, and her words sounded like a poem. Nokom, why do you speak in Cree? I asked. Nokom said, well, nosisiam. When I was your age, at home in my community, my friends and I always spoke our language. But at the school I went to far away from home, they wouldn't let us speak our words. All the children used their strange words. We didn't understand them at all. Our voices blended together like a flock of crows. Why did you have to talk in their language? I asked. They didn't like that we spoke our language, Nokom said. They wanted us to talk like everybody else. But sometimes in the summer, when we were alone and our teachers weren't anywhere around the place we were, we would whisper to each other in Cree. We would say all the words we weren't allowed to say so that we wouldn't forget them. And this made us happy. Now, Nokom said, I always speak my language. After our gardening work was done, I sat with my kokom in the backyard. Her brother came over and sat with us. He comes over all the time. We drank tea and ate bannock. The tea was hot and sweet, and the bannock was moist and warm and melted in my mouth. My kokom and my uncle talked and laughed like children. Nokom, why do you and Nokomis always spend time together? I asked. Nokom said, well, nosisim. When we were your age at home in our community, being with family was the most important thing. We played with each other, did chores together. We shared everything. But at the school I went to far away from home, they wouldn't let us be together. My brother and I were separated like day and night. Why were you and Nokomi separated? I asked. They didn't like when we were with family, Nokom said, because when we were together, We thought too much of home. But sometimes in the winter, when we were alone, and we were sure nobody could see us, we'd find each other. We'd take off our mitts, and in the crisp, cold air, we would hold hands, so we could be with each other. And this made us happy. Now, Nokum said, as she reached over and held my uncle's hand in mine, I'm always with my family. The end.
And now here from Orange Shirt Day in 2017, a group of Indigenous children drum and sing an honor song, Grandmother's Song. As we have moved at speed through September, it seems the life and ministry of Fairlawn has continued. And now, as you will have seen, we are cautiously moving to hold modified in-person worship services beginning Thursday, Sunday, Thanksgiving Sunday. It's been a week. Thanksgiving Sunday, October the 10th. To attend, you will need to register. The information about that and other precautions such as vaccination, masking, and distancing is all included in the email that you received a little over a week ago. And it was included in greetings also this week. It will be different from what we are used to in the sanctuary. It will be a shorter and somewhat less formal service. There won't be a choir, but you will hear the organ and the piano. We're experimenting as we go, and we will want your feedback and input along the way. And for those of you who have found us virtually online and who, for whatever reason, are unlikely to join in an in-person gathering at the church, I would love an opportunity to get to know you. We won't pester you for money or send you endless emails, but I wonder if you might send me a note just to say hi. Tell me from where you have been connecting with Fairlawn and why, and say a little bit about yourself. I'm really interested, and let me know what we can improve upon. I can be reached at duCharme, 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 at Fairlawn Avenue United, all one word, fairlawnavenueunited.ca. Lots more information can be found on our website. That's www.fairlawnchurch.ca, all one word, fairlawnchurch.ca. The work on a renewed look, refreshed look and feel of the website is close to being finished, and that is really exciting, and I'll share more about that next week. In 2019, upon the creation of the memorial register honoring the names of the children who died at residential schools, a prayer was offered by the Indigenous Ministries of the United Church of Canada. We begin our prayers of the people this week with some of those words. Great and heavenly Spirit, God of compassion, healing, and comfort, we lift up in prayer the sacred lives of the children, some now known to us, all known to you, who died in residential schools. We lift up in prayer the sacred lives of the children who went missing from these schools and whose fates are unknown to those who held them most dear. We grieve the loss of youth with so much potential, children of this land. The loss of their giftedness is our collective loss. We lament how long their families have had to live with unanswered questions. Hear our prayers for those who were not informed of their children's deaths at all or on a timely basis, for those who were not told where their daughters and sons had been buried, for those who have long hoped that a child who went missing somehow survived and had a good life, even as they also feared the worst. As members of a church which ran residential schools, we seek your help as we look to redress the many ways in which our church failed these Indigenous children, their families, and their communities. Inspire us all with energy, with wisdom, and commitment to the loving pursuit of the truth which will heal all of us in our brokenness and lead to reconciliation with our neighbors across this land. In this time together as a Fairlawn community of faith and action, we have opened our hearts, minds, and spirits to difficult things. Healing God, take the grief, the shock, the horror, and turn it into action that works for right relations. Action that works for healing and justice and hope. Let this be a moment that changes, a moment that transforms us, that we might walk in right relations. We give thanks for the simple gifts that you place within us that give texture and depth to life, our capacity to love, to cherish, to laugh, and to cry, inquiring minds that can learn, bodies that feel and experience the depths and heights of being human, hearts that know the joy and the pain of life shared. We pray for one another, for individuals and families near to us facing struggles and difficulties, including ones we may be unaware of, and for those living with loss. We hold in prayer with love those closest to our hearts. We keep silence. Loving God, may our thoughts and our words, our decisions and our actions renew life, revive hope, and restore kindness among us and beyond us. May Jesus' way of love and forgiveness be etched upon our lives. May it be so. Amen. Next Sunday, October 3rd, Coffee Chat will move to a new time in the afternoon to enable those who wish to attend in-person worship to also be able to participate. So coffee chat, or perhaps aperitif chat or afternoon tea, will happen from 4:15 p.m. in the afternoon through till 5 o'clock p.m. From 4:15 till 5, beginning next Sunday, October the 3rd. The format and process for logging into Zoom will be the same, but rather than your late morning coffee before lunch, we'll gather with your preferred refreshment ahead of dinner preparations. Today, for one last time, before we change times, our coffee hour chat will gather around the virtual coffee pot online using Zoom. Those details were in your notice sent this morning for this service, and it all begins at 11:15 a.m. this morning. I hope you will join us for some spirited conversation. And now, as we go from this place and time of gathering, a blessing of hope, a fierce and tenacious hope, hope despite, hope regardless, hope still, hope where we had ceased to hope, hope amid what threatens hope, hope with those who share our hope, hope beyond what we had hoped, hope that makes a way where there was no way, hope that takes us past our fear, hope that calls us into life, hope that blesses what is to come with peace. Go in peace and in hope. Amen.